to Michael Osborn, who I mentioned before, is the State Planning Manager for Fife, and Fife have been engaged by Council to undertake an independent expert review of this actual project. So Michael has been working on this project for some significant amount of time now, and actually done an extensive amount of research into material and evidence based on the scope that was presented to Council at the time of undertaking the review. So I'll hand over to Michael now to actually go through his independent review so far.
Thanks, Victoria. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Burton, for his presentation. Lots of good information in there, and lots of good images, which will enable me to flick through some of my context. Certainly very well researched. I'll go through my format of my presentation. Essentially, I'll skip through the context because I think that's been covered through both Victoria and Adrian. But I'll inform the members here about the approach taken. I'll then move straight into the scope and response, so a series of questions that we had and our preliminary response, and then end up with a summary. It's probably just worth letting you know that in terms of, whilst I'm the spokesperson here, and I'm a town planner, within my organisation there is civil engineers and surveyors, so we're a sort of a rounded organisation. So we've all had contributions to reviewing the council file. So I'll skip through some of those maps which we've seen before. I'll just note that in terms of the maps that I do have, the source of my information has been through the council file, and also looking through the Lands Titles Office. I understand that Mr. Burton might have access to some information from the applicant's surveyor, but I've seen those plans as part of my review. In terms of the approach, essentially the key element of that was to review the council file, which was very extensive, as you can imagine. It goes back with some history in terms of the rezoning of the land originally, so that's the PAR process. That was a process that involved council and the state government at the time. And then more specifically the land division application. And so that was from the lead up, the lodgement of that application, all the way through to the negotiations of the land management agreements post-approval. So we've waded through the volumes of that and tried to understand the chronology of events. We've obviously also reviewed the development plan at the time, which was dated 19th of August. That development plan refers to the principles, which again Mr. Burton has made reference to in his submission, and also has figure 4, so that's the relevant development plan. We've also reviewed a document very similar to the presentation that Mr. Burton has prepared tonight. I've had a copy of a document similar to that and reviewed that in detail. I've also had a number of meetings with relevant stakeholders, in particular the owners of 4 allotments on Stock Road, and I think most of the faces are here this evening. And then in more recent times, there's been some emails that have come through just in the last few days, post my briefing to council last week, and I've reviewed those at various levels of detail so far. In terms of the scope and findings, there was 6 questions that were part of the brief, which were broken up into some sub-questions. They're up there on the screen, and I will go through those for you. First question was seeking comment on the status and relevance of the development plan, and in particular the concept plan figure 4. Now again, Mr. Burton's shown figure 4, and the relationship of that to the land. As a planner, just with some context, it's important to note that a concept plan in a development plan, just like any principle, it's an advisory tool within the development plan. It's not mandatory. It's not a legal statute. It's advisory, and it's there to inform the assessment of the development application. Undoubtedly, the concept plan, though, is very central to this application, to that land division application. It was a key guiding document that provided a relationship between the flood level, or the flood line, and the open space. That was probably one of its key functions. So that being said, it is relevant, but it is advisory. And again, it's one element of numerous provisions that need to be considered as part of planning assessment. So the development plan must be read as a whole. So for those of you that don't know the planning system, you have metropolitan Adelaide provisions, you have council-wide provisions, you have zone provisions, you have multiple layers of policies, all that need to be read and considered when making an assessment of a planning application. In general terms, the zone provisions, so it's Rural Living 4 zone, they take more precedent or relevance as compared to the general council-wide provisions. So they are certainly very much a focus and a key to this land division application, but it's important to remember that you must consider the development plan as a whole. So, as an example, variance with 1, 2 or 3 provisions doesn't necessarily mean an application should be refused. That becomes a judgment for the planning authority to make. So in summary, in terms of Concept Plan 4, its purpose was to, when you look at the detail of that plan, it had a number of functions. It made reference to access road locations, so it was informing the land division where access should be brought into the site. Remembering the site originally comprised 2 allotments, so it was giving guidance how the land should be divided. So access road locations, I've mentioned the reserve and open space correlation, and again, as Mr. Burton did very well explain, it informed the approximate extent of the 100-year ARI. It was emphasised in that concept plan that the line shown on that plan was concept only. Turning now to the principles. So principles 7, 9 and 19 to 25, they're all contained within the rural living zone. Principle 7 confirms that the extent of the 100-year ARI was conceptual only. Further assessment and definition was required as part of the development application process. So again, that principle talks to the concept plan and flags the fact that that further investigation is required to verify that boundary. Principle 9 indicates that the floodplain, as shown on that plan, required hydrological assessment and verification and should form part of open space. So again, much of Mr. Burton's presentation was talking about the correlation between floodplain and public open space or reserve. So the intent of the development plan was making a clear correlation between those two. So that was the sort of the purpose of Principle 9. Principles 19 and 25, they're not listed up here, but essentially they came under the heading of stormwater management, and they had a focus of guiding development within the floodplain with a focus on stormwater management. So, in particular, Principle 19 actually talks about there should be no building or development within the floodplain. Again, that reinforces this matter of the relationship between open space and the floodplain. But then it talks about some more detailed matters such as waste management, general stormwater management and pollution prevention. Those sort of matters become relevant both in a detailed delivery sense for the land division, but also are relevant for subsequent dwelling applications that were lodged subsequently. So those principles certainly set the scene and are critical to the assessment of the application and are the most relevant provisions. In terms of the second question was in relation to flood risk, again central to the development. Was sufficient technical information available to enable a proper assessment? This is one that undoubtedly will raise some debate. There is certainly a lot of correspondence on Council's file that talks about flood risk. There is information from the applicant's engineers, Tompkins, and then there's subsequent advices from Council's engineer, Conor Wagner, with Council staff interacting between the two, seeking information. So there's a lot of correspondence that went backwards and forwards up to the planning decision at the council meeting on the 27th of March. And a lot of that information was still coming in very, very late in the piece ahead of that meeting. I think one observation when you read the file goes back to almost day one with the Tompkins report. So I understand there's a lot of potential criticism of council and the like, but when you look at the Tompkins report, their criteria didn't have any reference to the development plan. So they talked about typical approach to deal with typical planning approaches in floodplain areas. They did not have any reference to correlating open space with floodline. They were looking at other normal management measures. So, but that again, I'm not criticising Tompkins for that. That was their approach. But this is part of the issue that there was a review of flood risk, which from a professional level was dealt with. The engineers were concurred the flood risk was being dealt with. But the actual question about open space and floodline and extent of floodline was the issue that wasn't necessarily asked at that time. So the key to it, and again, Mr. Burton did provide lots of information in this, is that there was only an approximate extent of the 100-year ARI at the time of the decision on the proposed land division. The engineering advice was indicating that 4 levels could be dealt with to help deal with the risk. But the key point of confirming the extent of the ARI was not completed. Some of the reasons why that might have occurred is the fact that the detail and contour survey had not been undertaken. Again, that was a plan referred to by Mr. Burton. That was provided post the planning approval and in the period leading up to the provision of the deposit plan. So in a basic sense, without that information to do with the ARI, there's a position and opinion that the information to inform council's decision was insufficient to inform the assessment of Principle 7 and 9.
Exactly.
That being said, as I said, Council did consider flood risk, there's no doubt about that. It relied on finished floor levels as a management tool. Again, a lot of that was actually driven by the engineering advices that were given. And as a consequence, Council accepted development of land within the floodplain as part of that land division approval. Now, question 2.2 was the Council's decision to approve the development one that was open to it having regard to the information available. So again, Council's open to make any decision that it so chooses. The issue is you need to make a balanced assessment against the relevant provisions of the development plan. Plan A will have a different position to Plan B. Its planning is a subjective subject. I think it's clear that there is an intent about correlating open space with reserve. The Council made a decision not to correlate that, but in response to the question, Council was open to make that decision. Correlation to that is in relation to the reserve. The question is up there, was the Council's decision to accept the reserve land one that was open to it? Well, no different to my last response. It is open to Council to consider that. Again, you've got the issue about how flexible and how variable you might well be in relation to the extent of open space that you might accept. But again, it's clear that the development plan did have an expectation about correlating open space with the floodline. It's clear, again, from my review of the file, that there wasn't a lot of direct communication or dialogue in relation to that between, for instance, the applicant, between the council staff and the applicant. There wasn't focus on that issue in terms of the agenda report that went to the council meeting. We understand that there was some discussion at the council meeting, but it certainly didn't appear to be, based on an agenda report, a matter of significant focus in the assessment. So that's, I can only go on documentation as such, whether those that assessed the application or reported on the application did make a judgment and just did not report on that. That's speculation, but it's certainly clear that it wasn't an obvious deliberation presented to the council. So, question 4 is the survey plan, and that's the most relates to the I guess the post-approval survey plan, which that was the plan which verified the extent of the 100-year ARI and certainly increased the extent of the flooding as previously understood. So we've made some comments there about the purpose of that plan was. Again, we've had to make a judgment based on our experience and the fact that from our review of the file, it was a plan essentially sitting in isolation in the file. There wasn't a lot of correspondence relating to it, but it was we understand from reviewing some reports from Tonkin around that same date that they make reference to further survey information, which was particularly relevant to Tributary Creek, and as a consequence of that, there was some refinement to their engineering advice, including some variation and modification to the finished floor levels that were ultimately adopted in the land management agreement for stage 1. So the plan probably had a number of functions, but certainly it defined the extent of the flood, and again it showed that flood extent was a lot broader than previously understood. And we believe it would have been used by the engineers as part of the detailed design, and as I said, it was also there available at the time that LMA was being settled. Question 4.2 was trying to sort of rationale the difference in the extent of the 100-year floodplain. So again, Mr. Burton showed a number of plans that showed the variables that occurred. Essentially, our engineering people from our office, having looked at the file, believe that the variation in that floodplain was due to the more rigorous analysis, the hydrological analysis that was undertaken, but also the provision of that the detailed survey relating to Tributary Creek, which together provided a far more accurate information in relation to the ground conditions and the geometry, which you can then plot that flood line with. So essentially, though, that information came in post the approval, and the way planning sort of law works is that once a planning decision is made, the planning decision is set, that further and better information then is information that just has to get used moving going forward. Was the difference significant? Well, again, if we refer back to Mr. Burton's plans, the diagrams there show the variation from the original approximate extent to the final defined extent was significant. It's significant in a spatial sense in terms of its position within allotments. Of course, the implications of that relate to the development of the land and how future applications would be assessed. And I guess it reinforces the fact that the correlation between open space and floodline was further, or non-correlation was further exacerbated as such. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, but should council have done something differently? There was sufficient directions within the development plan to see that floodline be defined. It would have helped inform the original planning process. It would have helped inform that judgment about open space and the provision of reserve that correlates with that boundary. That being said, reading the file independently and trying to picture the circumstances at the time, you can see an engineering report that was provided. You can see correspondence going backwards and forwards between engineers and engineers reporting that we can manage the outcomes. The focus was, and it quite often happens unfortunately, but the actual focus moved towards outcomes of developing the land rather than perhaps the principal question, should land be open space or allotment. So that's certainly an opinion that I can formed that it would have been beneficial to have had that information. Post the approval, essentially there's a number of standard practices which occurred. In this particular case, a statement of requirements and the land management agreement needed to be entered into. And again, the focus on flooding was a significant part of that post-approval work. We mentioned the survey plan that was undertaken. There was the further engineering reports from Tompkins and Conor Wagner's, some legal advice that was provided as well, and ultimately that was then settled to establish land management agreements, which now sit on the titles that relate to this area. It would seem that those LMAs, those agreements which deal with a number of issues, but in particular set floor levels, they they would be based on the most current engineering advice. So there's nothing from the file to suggest that those floor levels nominated on those land management agreements that they reflect what the current advice was at that time. So they've, in effect, despite the deficiencies with original approval, the land management agreements managed to ensure the sites can be developed. There's been some questions about that survey plan which defined the flood extent, what its ongoing relevance or status is. Essentially, that plan was produced as part of that land division application approval process. It relates to that development itself. It doesn't have any other sort of formal status, and I think it's important to note that basically post the land division, once subsequent applications are proposed on allotments, it becomes a fresh process in the fact that an applicant needs, if you want to build a house, an applicant needs to provide information. Council needs to make a judgment if they've got sufficient information to make a decision. And that's the way the process works. That plan was obviously on the council's file as part of its land division. Whether it was used to assess and to inform subsequent dwelling applications, that's a question that's been asked, but that's part of the question that sort of has gone beyond my current brief. So I haven't looked at dwelling applications that have followed the actual land division, but I'm aware of comments that have been raised in relation to that. So, just drawing towards the conclusion, the ongoing status and relevance of the concept plan. Again, the concept plan, its key role was to inform the land division. So its key role was back in 2000. Essentially, when a developer came to develop the land, it was a key informing tool. It essentially served its purpose at that particular point in time. Similarly, the principles we've referred to previously, 7 and 9, 19 to 25, they were relevant to the land division, and we've talked about sort of the focus on those principles and whether the proposal necessarily conforms with the intent of those. The principles 20 and 25, they relate to stormwater management and essentially are more relevant to the subsequent dwelling applications that were lodged. The LMA, ongoing status of that, well, that's a legal document that is an agreement between council and the landowner that sits on the title, and it actually stays on the title, so it transfers between ownership. So that, well, the multiple land management agreements, their status sort of has more ongoing rigour than a development plan which can change and has changed over a period of time. So in summary, that detailed contour survey plan, ideally that would have been available to inform the planning decision. It helps the assessment of Principles 7, 9 and 19 in terms of defining the extent of the floodplain. It's important to note though that flooding was not dismissed as an issue. It was central really to the file at the time. There was a lot of advice given, as I've mentioned, in the lead up to and following the planning approval. Again, I can see that the issue is that the focus of that engineering advice was not directed towards Principle 7 and 9 and Figure 4. Despite that, those issues, council can make a decision. It can make any decision that it so chooses. I think it's clear that there were certain elements of the development plan where the proposal did not comply, and certainly didn't comply with the intent. Doesn't necessarily follow that it's the wrong decision. That becomes a matter of opinion. One of the key points that I haven't reached necessarily a conclusion on relates to this reduction in open space, as well articulated by Mr. Burton. That is a valid observation, incorrect observation that the open space did reduce. Again, with the duration of time perhaps, but through my review of the council file, I haven't managed to find any correspondence that provides information about that process. But ultimately, the deposited plan with the Lands Titles Office was the legal document that was endorsed, and that's how the titles were created. But yes, the reserve did reduce, and the reserve didn't correlate with the 100-year floodline. And then finally, post the approval, I think the council process of dealing with the flooding and negotiating land management agreements was all reasonable and appropriate, and with some rigour in its assessment. And I think that was certainly a satisfactory approach that was taken. Again, I need to emphasise that my scope sort of is basically concluded with the land division application process, so I don't have any comment or observation about matters sort of to do with dwelling applications that were since that land division. So that's essentially the summary there. I think it's worth noting that again, Mr. Burton's submission, I think, was a lot of information there. I believe is to be valid. I do have one comment though in relation to the council meeting and the attachments that were provided to that council meeting, and I do note that in the appendices to that there was a version of the development plan included with that, the current development plan at that time. So I'm unclear as to any comment about the development plan not being made available to council because it was included in the agenda. So, but I'm happy to talk further about that post the meeting. But yeah, and I'm certainly very welcome to receive any feedback and comments in relation to any other matter there. But that was just one observation that I believe council did have the development plan available for them to make this decision. That concludes my presentation.
So Michael's not allowed to go away just yet. So I'm very conscious if we've been sitting very patiently listening for the last couple of hours. So it's a lot to digest, a lot of information has been provided. I thank both Adrian and Michael for their presentations. But now is an opportunity for those members who have any questions of Michael in regards to his current review, his draft review. If you wish to raise any. As I said before, I already have received a number of written questions that do go beyond the current scope, but I am going to still be looking at those and where possible will be addressing them in my report back to Council. But if anyone has any other questions they'd like to ask of Michael now, I'm going to ask Michelle to bring up the other microphone. Oh, she's got another one. Michelle has a microphone. Thank you. So if you do have any questions of Michael, so please show your hands, and I'm happy to facilitate that for the next 15-20 minutes. Ben?
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Michael, for your presentation, and thanks for receiving my questions prior to this meeting. So I'm going to comment on one thing you've brought up, which is not in your assessment there. You noted that 999255, the surveyor's map, came after the original approval, and you also suggested that Principles 7 and 9 had done their job once that approval had been finished. You said that moving forward, 999254 would be a bonus moving forward in further assessments, but this was outside your scope to see what assessments had been done between the original subdivision and now. But looking further forward from today on, is it your opinion that 999254 is an essential tool for future development applications in that floodplain? And if someone decides to subdivide, although there is a limit to the land size of 1 hectare, and I believe all allotments now are below the 2 hectares, so it shouldn't be subdivided. But as you said, there can be a variance in the development plan, so there can be an application to subdivide a 1.8 hectare with variance that could be approved. Would it be necessary to have a true surveyor's floodplain map for that to be assessed and for the development application to be put in? Thank you.
Now, I haven't looked at the current development plan, so if you're talking about hypothetical, if an application is lodged tomorrow, I haven't looked at what the current development plan says, so I'm not sure if Principle 7 applies today. So,
It does.
yeah, it's probably one I can take that on notice to give you a more detailed response to. But if you were, I think I gave the answer before in terms of if you're trying to define the extent of the 100-year ARI, where the flood boundary is, then you need that information. Principle 19 at the time talked about no buildings to be within the 100-year return flood plain. So again, you need that information to define whether it's in or out.
Thank you.
David, bring in the microphone.
Thank you. You spoke about the land management agreement and talk about how they looked at designing flood mitigation by raising floor levels. has it actually been identified in any of the LMAs that there's reference to no land to be developed in a floodplain of a 100-year floodplain area? And if so, why has that been done? I mean, any land been sold, constructed on against the LMA agreement of a 100-year floodplain statement? That makes sense. I'll write this up and send it through tomorrow.
Thank you.
Just for information, my focus has been on the LMA for stage 1, which I have. I think stages 2 and 3 are similar in nature. They're not. Okay. Well, I've only focused on stage 1, so
Stage 2 is different.
Yeah, no,
Stage
they're
2
all
has-
different. All three are different.
No, but as regard floor levels, they both have the same concept you talked about, which is minimum floor levels 500 millimetres. But when you go to stage 2, I'll read it. This is all it says. Any finished floor levels in buildings on the subject land must be established in a height above the 100-year flood level as calculated by a suitable qualified engineer to the reasonable satisfaction of the council. That's what's on the LMA at stage 2. Stage 3 goes back to referencing the allotments with minimum levels and a 500 millimetre above the Tompkins consulting. So stage 2...
So stage 3 seems about similar to number.
Stage 1 and 3 are identical. Stage 2 has no reference to floor levels. So what happens to the person once the setback goes with the titles?
So again, I think that's just useful in terms of finalising the advice. Is that this is my focus being on the stage 1, and I've got the stage 2, but I'll review that and as part of the report. Sorry, but going back to your question there, in terms of, in essence, you're indicating, should the LMA say that you're in the floodplain? Is that?
Yeah, basically, if there's a statement in there saying that no development on any lots to be included in the stage of a 100-year floodplain, and if so, has it been done, and why has it been done?
Well, it certainly hadn't been done in the stage 1, which I've reviewed. It just essentially deals with minimum flood levels, and then there's reference. To the underneath the table, there's reference there to the Tonkin flood assessment, and that's the extent of the detail.
Until you review 2 and 3, you won't know the answer.
Okay,
I
before
don't need a microphone.
before I take your question though, does any other community members have questions before I take one from Councillor Charles? I think I should let our community members take the questions
I'm happy to
first.
resign this evening.
No, you're not going to
I am
resign.
happy to resign.
You're not allowed to. You're going to have your question, but I just think let the community
I've asked
members
these
go
questions
first.
for 4 years. Been blocked by the council.
I'm not blocking
for 4
you.
years.
I'm not blocking you, Councillor Charles, but I just think the community are
Environmentalists
here
in the back of the room.
and the community members should go first. And then you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kerry Trezise, a member of the community, and have followed this issue for a number of years and looked at many documents. And I've always been really bewildered about this LMA agreement because the nature of the LMA really infers or implies of the presence of a floodplain anyway, regardless of what's written on it. And an LMA, it does apply to the height of the buildings, to where it has to be built, and it does assume by that direction that a person doesn't step outside of the building if there's a flood. It also assumes that persons don't step from a car or need to be outside or visiting a neighbour or do not have any lower ground level property on the land to go to. The nature of the land does not provide in principle for development on the floodplain at any rate. So my question is, why has the Land Management Agreement been seen as a superior planning tool and mechanism over the development plan in the planning approval process for the Stock Road, CROZIER Hill land development? I put that question to you, although you have said that you haven't actually dealt with the planning process applications. But the origins of the planning, the LMA, provide for the future of the development. So why would they have been used as a superior tool? Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I'm only giving an opinion because I obviously wasn't involved in making the decision, but again, land management agreement is dealing with essentially the floor levels. So it's perhaps subjective to say it's sort of taking over the development plan as such. It's two different tools, two different processes. The planning approval was to really deal with should the lots be created, and then you've got that issue we talked about in terms of open space versus the 1 in 100. The LMA is to do with subsequent management and development of the land, so to have LMA, it's not there to replace the development plans, it's to support decisions that were made.
I can assist with an explanation on that. That's all I want to do.
Okay. Look, I'm not going to...
It clearly says here, and you haven't allowed for the complying development, which is Principle 26. And Principle 26 says in F, the building is not located within any floodplain, except sheds, garages, outbuildings and all the rest of them, 110 metres above. So we've got the first or one of our contours at 110 metres and above. And this finished floor levels thing has nothing to do with the flood from the river. It was to do with the water in the storm event coming down the hills and protecting people who were above, because they're not supposed to be on the floodplain. And I know what you're saying. The council made a decision. It's very depressing. This is a very depressing evening. But that's what it talks about. The finished floor has got nothing to do with what's on the floodplain whatsoever.
That's the non-compliant principle we talked about.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, 20.
out of your whatever it was, unfortunately. But I do hope this is not the end of it this evening, because I'm not very happy about this at all, I can assure you. I know you've done a great job, Victoria, but you know, here we were, we had a meeting on the 13th of August, and now we're here 21 days later, and tomorrow we go into caretaker mode, so we can't really say much unless we resign. I'm considering it very strongly.
Let me just clarify on that one for you.
go through.
Councillor Charles, just because we're going into caretaker period doesn't mean we don't progress with this review. And the only thing, yes you can, as an elected member, you can still continue to do your duties as an elected member, and you have a responsibility to. The whole idea of this review, it will continue throughout caretaker mode. The only thing you can't do is look to spend unbudgeted money during that time. There's no reason why you can't continue with the review.
Well, I'd be happy to resign to shine a serious light on this statewide. That's what I would do. Court grandstanding, if you like.
And then Mike Gray, sorry, after Michael.
Hi, I'm Mike Smoker. Had a chance to listen to the arguments here tonight, and if we try and break it down into a number of different areas, and there's some questions I would like to ask with that, also some observations. It appears from Michael's assessment there that the council at that time did not act illegally, and there could be no action taken against it because it was free to make the decisions that it chose. That, however, doesn't provide any comfort for the people who've been disaffected by that, by buying those pieces of land, and what that actually means to them, and also our moral and other obligations to our constituents here, and also what that might mean to the rest of the community who may need to be available or willing to fund any moral or other type of cause to assist these people who have actually been induced in many cases to buy this and find themselves in a very difficult position where finished floor levels may be the area that's assessed upon, but they're at risk for the type of building they construct, and also at risk that they may not achieve insurance, they may not achieve a whole range of other issues. So this is a damn mess. The best bit saying that the council handled it poorly and clumsily and even recklessly at the time, and one person in particular, the developer, benefited from that.
Yeah.
There's also some questions to be asked about how the final development plan didn't actually meet with what was approved and how that was lodged. There was a difference in the boundaries there. Didn't amount to much, but it is, something happened there and not enough diligence was shown. So the other question that I'd like to ask, up to this point in time, how much money has the council spent on legal fees, reviews, time in lieu, all those types of things? And I'll put that clearly on notice. It's something that needs to be tabulated and announced to the public. How much money have we spent so far in getting to this stage? What will it be in the future? Who knows? But I think we need to come with open minds and with an open heart to the people who are affected and on behalf of the community and try to solve this problem that was created some 20 years ago. And my heart goes out to the current landholders. I'm sorry for the position that you're in.
Michelle McCrae had a question.
Firstly, I'd like to congratulate Adrian Burton because I think the amount of work that he's done on this problem is just above and beyond on the community's behalf. So Adrian, thank you very much from all of us. I'm really concerned about what's happened here because of several aspects, and I'll start with the land management agreement. The land management agreement is a formal agreement. It's a contract between council and the landowner. And this is covered under the Development Act. So it's not something that's got wriggle room in it. It must be entered into willingly and it becomes binding once it's been registered. Please note it's important that LMAs are signed by both parties prior to development approval. Prior to development approval. One of the LMAs that I've got here in front of me was signed 4 years after development approval. One of the three documents that we have here. So how does that comply with the legislation when it was signed 4 years after the development approval was given? One of the issues that was looked at in the development plan process was access roads. Access roads, and you've talked about it in your report, requires that consideration be given to access to emergency vehicles going into that area. Anybody in this room who knows the area knows that there is a massive culvert there, 2 metre high warning signs and a flood sign that says, warning, this area is prone to frequent flooding. That information was required to be included by this council in the land management agreements. It is not included in any of those 1, 2 or 3 land management agreements, which it was required to be done so by council. I've just looked into the Blatchford LMA that he received from council. It's not included in his. Therefore, when you apply for subsequent insurance, as all those owners have, they didn't know when they applied for their insurance that they had to state in the duty of disclosure that the area was frequently going to be flooded and emergency vehicles could not gain access to their properties. Therefore, they haven't answered the questions properly to the insurers. Therefore, the contract of insurance is void or voidable by the insurance company, and therefore their properties are not insured. I've heard it said that, well, cave into let the buyer beware. But no, we've received advice from a barrister in environmental law and somebody above the barrister at a higher level who doesn't want to be named at this time, that the responsibility with this rests with the council. In the event of another flooding series like we had in 2016, or Penny help us, a 1 in 100, it's going to come back on the council, not on the individual landowners, to pay for damage and bring in the council, us, the community. You haven't addressed this at all in your investigation, and I wonder why. Also in your investigation, when you say that things weren't done properly at the time, you've only used the word ideally. Well, we're talking about law here. Law requires a yes or a no answer, not ideally. I'm really confused when we're spending $20,000 on this investigation as to why we're getting answers like ideally, when it should have been or should not have been. We're left now with a situation where those people down there aren't insured or would not be insured in the event of a flood, and really a report that needs a lot more work done on, I think, to answer some very outstanding questions. Thank you.
Yep, we'll report it. So,
May I say that not being affected myself, but with others who are and will in the future, I think this should really come on heavy to the council and to the developer to reimburse the people who have got land and buildings in the wrong places, to relocate them, and not at a price suggested by council. It is relocated to what they want. And no questions asked. Because I know there's other areas in Victor Harbour that has been allowed to build in similar areas. And this council should never, ever, years ago, been allowed to operate, because there's lots of other things I could mention that have gone on that should not have. And there's a lot of people in the background of council who have something to answer about this, and we are not happy. We have been made as though we've got to keep quiet if we know about some of the situations. That's all I've got to say. And those councillors and the people in the background know who they are.
Tina, did you have any other questions? Oh, and then I've got Terry, and then Ben, and then David.
Wait to make a statement.
I've got little hands going up. That's right, Senator.
Mine's short.
I'm just conscious of time.
Thank you. I did bring to council, in fact, I walked CROZIER Road, Stock Road a couple of times, and I handed out some information, and I gave it to Mr. Izzo and his wife, who live at that block where they've got their letterbox out of the floodplain, if they had a letterbox. Incidentally, the gentleman sitting here is a gentleman who is completely under the floodplain, block 29, across the other side of the river, and he thought he was the only one who had a problem. Everybody over there was happy living in Disneyland, but they weren't living in Disneyland, all of them. In fact, both those two properties, that's 28 and 27, have now been sold and the people have moved on. But whilst Mr. Izzo had it on the market, I thought it might be prudent that the council make some sort of arrangement with him and purchase that back. I was hit with a code of conduct, but it actually didn't stick, that one for once, and Councillor Moira Jenkins spoke very, very strongly against me and asked questions about how much trouble I was in for speaking to the gentleman. That's all I wanted to say. I am so angry, you can tell it. You know, you just don't spend 4 years doing this. It's just been that I can't even put it into words that are decent to use in this room.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, Councillor Andrews and then Ben. Sorry.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a couple of comments. First comment is that unfortunately none of the councillors or any of the planning staff that allowed this to go through are now here or on the council or indeed in the administration. So we can't find specifically against where they made their decisions. The second thing is that nowadays, whether it's good or bad, we have now what is called CAP, or used to be is a planning panel, which has five independent assessors on it. So it can no longer be friends of council or friends of the friends that go through this. You have independent assessments being done by CAP, which I would dare to say would never have allowed this to happen at that point in time. But we now have to live with this. And the way we live with this is exactly what Victoria has done. She's brought it out into the open. She's allowed us to have our debate and listen to other people's point of view. And I'm sure that the council will move a motion to some extent or other to finalise this. I do agree that we do need to know how much this has cost over the years that Ben has been pursuing this, and I take my hat off to Ben for pursuing it. But at the end of the day, we have to move forward with what we have been given. We've been given a chalice which is not the best, and we have to use our integrity within this room, within the council, within the administration, to bring it to a close. And that's really all I'd like to say is that we need to work out a way to move forward. We can't keep on looking back at decisions that have been made that unfortunately have put us in a bad position. We've got to move forward with some sort of vision for the future. Thanks for the opportunity. I've had 8 years without much speaking. It's a pleasure to have some. First of all, this tonight is only another step forward. We're not getting answers. We don't expect answers. You shouldn't expect them tonight. One point which hasn't been brought up is the section 33 and how that applies, where all relevant provisions must be considered under the Development Act of 1993. If they're not considered, the development is deemed to be non-compliant. Now, when you look at the looks simple from one side, looks simple from another side, but they're coming from different directions. My side says, show me where Principles 7 and 9 have been considered. They're allowed to be, if they're considered, they're allowed to be saying, oh, we considered that and it's invariant, so we threw it out. But if they haven't been considered, the development is non-compliant. Now, on the other side, I say to you, show us where they have not been considered. Now, how do you show where something has not been considered? There's no sign of it, where there should be in several different places. There are signs that these principles were kept from the elected members who made this decision. This is disputed because it was in the back of that document, I believe. I haven't seen it, but you've told us that it is. But when Tompkins made their 1999 report, which Council relied on, and I'm afraid, Michael, you were a little bit critical of that report in that you said they should have said more about Principles 7 and 9. In fact, they never even mentioned it because they hadn't been informed about Principles 7 and 9. They didn't know about it. They did a report to get the levels for the land management agreement. And the land management agreement showed council were doing something about the floodplain, even though in reality it was a diversion from the development plan itself, which should have been the main focus and wasn't. Now, I think we could ask Tompkins, did they know about the Principles 7 and 9 when they were doing that assessment? I'm sure the answer would be no, because Tompkins are a very big company, very efficient, and they would have had something, just a mention of that, in that report. So, could you please explain for the audience tonight Section 33 of the Development Act, please? Thank you.
Sorry, Ben, I don't have Section 33 with me. I prefer to have it in front of me to actually interpret it for you. But I think basically it means that you might, it's to do with matters which an application must be assessed against, yes, including all relevant versions of the development plan. But I'm not sure if the term non-complying is.
Yes, non-complying is in there.
Yeah, I'll take it. It's in your written submission, so I'll take that one on notice. But I'm sure.
David, did you have another question?
Sorry, but sorry, it's my
I believe you haven't got the scope.
No, I'll be able to answer
That's
that.
the problem to go into a lot of these questions tonight, so it's up to elected members to give us the scope. We need the scope from our elected members, that's what we need from them. Nothing more, because they couldn't read anything, but they can give you the scope so you can do it for us. That's what I'd like to see.
I'll be able to answer that question under my scope, just like I can't put it.
Are you? Okay, thank you very much.
I'll do that in a measured way. Okay. But I just wanted to say that about, getting back to my comment on Tompkins, I wasn't criticising Tompkins at all. It's more to do with the fact that I was reading their assumptions and their approach, and was highlighting the fact you had an engineer doing engineering work and you've got a planner doing planning work. Sometimes they don't talk. Yeah. So it was just an observation about the fact that they had certain assumptions. And those assumptions as engineers are fine. It's just that it wasn't the question that the assessment needed in terms of, so again, it comes back to purpose of advice.
Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria, for a second question. It's basically on the lines of future-proofing. Does the current City of Victor Harbour development plan include Principles 1, 7, 9, 19 and 25? So this doesn't happen again for any future developments.
No. I'll take on those, but I mean, the development plan has changed considerably since that time, and there's a whole heap of legislation that's come over the top of those requirements, and we're actually in the midst of an entire change in the way in which development is done within South Australia at this current time, so it is going to change again. The whole process in terms of the Development Assessment Panel to the CDAT now, which is different again. There's only one elected member as opposed to the whole council making decisions. So from the Rao government to now with the current new government, the planning system is changing right before our eyes. So I can't answer that question right now, but happy to explain it in my report.
Not in the development plan. They've been taken out completely.
It's changed like for like, wasn't it, Ben? It's changed like for like.
Changed what?
Wasn't the wording they used, it was changing.
Yeah, like for like, they just took all the principles out.
Okay.
And they changed the river on our place. This is interesting. The new development plan, you have the better development plan, which is approved, now has a river running uphill. So if you want to come down and see people flying up hills, then there's a spot to go to, because they decided that the river was best to run straight into the River Inman, where in reality it runs parallel till it reaches the bridge at Swains Crossing. But they didn't want to change that because
I'm conscious of
Because
time.
it's
I
going uphill.
you haven't had a chance to speak yet, so I can see your hand up there.
Councillor Charles is the only person who said he actually went to the place, and I think that should be part of every council planning, because I know I had a look at this area when I was looking to build, and I thought, kangaroos, green everywhere, floodplain, not going to build there. So that's one thing. The other thing is, Mr. Smoker referred to the developer. what about the developer? Is there any responsibility on the part of the developer?
He's declared himself bankrupt.
Twice.
Several times bankrupt. Bankrupt at least 3 times.
So Mr. Losa has a question. Sorry, Kerry, and then
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to reiterate something you said earlier. I do think it's a bit unfair to put your advisor there on the spot and expect him to come up with the answers. You did say if people put their questions in writing and hand them in relatively quickly, you'll see that they're answered. And that's exactly what I intend to do. And I hope others will follow suit, because it's a bit unfair to put this bloke over the barrel here on the spot.
but I think we're paying him significant. It can have a little bit of tenderness.
That's right.
But the rest will come later.
Thank you.
Kerry.
I just noticed earlier that Councillor Andrews mentioned that no councillor is around at the time that this process happened. Well, we do have a councillor in our presence that was there when this first started. I'm not quite sure why that councillor hasn't stood up and said who or they are, but I'm sure that in the process that will be helpful, that particular councillor does recount the events that happened back in 2000 as correlated in the report. Thank you.
Well, right now I'm going to stand up. Thank you for that. And as most of you people here tonight will understand that, is that one or this one? Will understand that when you make comment as a former member of council, and I'm thinking running again, you have to be careful. And that's the reason why I'll put what I've scribbled down in writing, and I'll double look at it before I hand it in.
Have you signed it?
And the thing is, though, you need to sort of consider carefully, and you need to remember that it's 18 years ago. But there are some things that have occurred, and I've already made mention of it, that stick in my mind, because I can tell you when you slap me down, it never goes out there. So just please bear with me after a while. As others seem to think, and I really don't know where the ball is going to land, but you need to be careful, just to protect yourself, let alone anything else. But believe you me, the other side of that coin is, I believe, council, along with state government, is so well protected that the ball is unlikely to bounce very far. And that's a very honest opinion of what I think did. Thank you.
I might take that one, so we can't get hand anymore. I'm conscious of the time, because you have all sat here very patiently for the last 2.5 hours. And I do reiterate, if you do have specific questions that you would like Michael to address as part of the scope or outside of the scope, that you put them in writing. We have recorded tonight's meeting, so a number of the questions that we will be able to go back through and have a listen to, but it is really always best to put it in writing. My intention, and I've got a where to from his slide, but I think I can just read to it before without bringing it up, is the intent is that Michael will actually readdress his draft report. He will do some refinement to it based on tonight's meeting. There'll also obviously be another series of questions that are outside of that scope, and where possible we'll look to provide answers. But if they are quite detailed and they're going to require more expensive investigation by the council, it's a decision for the chamber to make, and it's to be part of the report that I put forward to the chamber. My intent is to put a report up for September. That was the original outline of my report about undertaking the independent review, is that I would have something back to the council before the end of September. But it's not to say that that's where it stops. If the council then wishes to go further, it will look to go further. I think it's about providing answers to the community. I'm not saying that you can resolve everything that's happened 18 years ago. It's about learning from those lessons, a lot of things that can be learnt. Those changes have already been made, and it's about council being accountable for its decisions moving forward. So I thank you all very much for your time. I thank Adrian for the time again that I've spent a considerable amount of time with you since I've been with the council the last 8 months. And thank you for your presentation tonight. Thank you, Michael, for your presentation, and other members have come with questions to tonight's meeting. Being just fine.
His Worship last Monday night said the questions from the gallery, and this is more for Steve, he's had a heart attack and he's got a question in. Just for the record, he said they would be responded to tonight, and there haven't been. You've explained it to me. Would you like to explain it for the record, please?
Yes. In the response to 2 questions from the gallery, one from yourself and one from Mr Nichols, the explanation was that we were having tonight's forum, which is based on the CROZIER review, and that's what it related to. They weren't addressed tonight, and even if they were, a written response will be provided at the next council meeting. So I'll make sure that that is provided. My intent is to try and resolve this matter in a professional manner rather than having constant questions from the gallery. I don't think that's productive. I think we should be able to provide you those answers without having to use that avenue. So hopefully this review will enable that to happen.
Do you consider...
Your question infers wrongdoing, an appropriate answer to a question? I thought all questions, that's what we question.
Well,
inferring wrongdoing, is that a problem?
Not always, but it depends on the question. I think the provisions of the council in terms of its code of practice and procedures does stipulate if the question is vexatious, or it's attacking an individual, or it's a personal attack, or it's inferring wrongdoing without any ability to justify it, is the public forum a place to answer that? If you've had to go to that resort that that's the only place you feel it's going to get responded to, then we'll bring it forward. That's why we have that provision in the gallery. But I would hope that we are moving forward as an organisation, that people feel comfortable that they're getting their answers answered before having to resort to that. And that's part of my changes that I've got in place.
Just a little jumpy, just a question. Nick's sitting over here and he has not yet built on his flood-ridden property. You saw it in the corner there. He comes down and cuts the lawns occasionally, or the grass.
Yeah,
and your shed is on high ground.
Yeah.
And when you creep in, when it's flooding through your driveway, you try not to go too far to the right. What are you going to do? You're going to build a Queenslander? What will you do?
You can't do anything with it. It's not fit for purpose anymore. There's nowhere, when you actually look at where your wastewater, where your biocycles will go on a little bit of higher ground, we strike a problem all the time. A lot of it's down to the land management agreement as well, because on that particular block, there's 50... Yeah,
I can hear
on that particular block, I've got a restriction that I can't build within 50 metres of the river and various other setbacks, which really, really does restrict any development whatsoever on that property. I can't build on the 100 ARI. That's impossible to do. It's easy for somebody to turn around and say, we can engineer this, and you can put it 500 millimetres above the 100 AR line, but really, council should have gone back when they started talking about doing that, because that's an easy way to cop out of it, when really the council should have gone back to the developer and said, hey, redesign the whole basin. That's what should have happened, but it didn't. And I think it's a weakness in our council at that time. And so I've got a block that's worthless, absolutely worthless really. And as we all know. And also, while we're just talking, and you may be to answer this, Victoria, the State Government Development Assessment Commission was active in the year 2000.
Actually, I can answer that.
Yes.
Yeah, it would have been.
Yeah.
Then why, because of the technicalities of this development, why didn't the council hand that over to the control of the Assessment Commission and not try to do something, which obviously they were incapable at the time of making the correct decisions?
The regulations provide circumstances where, which outline who the planning authority is, and it's not just, oh, it's a difficult, challenging application, let's get someone else to do it. That's not, there's not a clause for that. It's more black and white in terms of certain developments become commission developments, and most of them are council assessments.
I'm under the impression that a lot of developments, actually, the elected members aren't really technically apt or have the experience to pass an approval on it. And the planning department of the council automatically send them to what was GAC. So that's another angle to come from.
I guess the qualifications of decision makers has been part of the reform process that's happened in more recent years, that was mentioned again earlier on tonight, with the composition of council panels. Are still, most developments still sit within councils, but the composition of